It is October 3rd, 2024, and Israel continues to escalate tensions in the Middle East as earlier today it carried out additional bombings that specifically targeted central Beirut. We're watching Israel target heavily populated residential areas in a sovereign nation over and over again. As a reminder that it's not just the Palestinian people, it's not just the Gaza Strip. The terror that Israel is carrying out is taking place all across the region. And we're watching as the US is doing nothing. In fact, according to Lebanon's foreign minister, there was plans for a possible ceasefire deal between Hezbollah and Israel that the US had all but guaranteed, and that Hezbollah Secretary General Seyed Hassan Nasrallah had agreed to, and then Israel assassinated him. And it's not just as if they carried out some small attack and he happened to be collateral damage. No, they went above and beyond, violating every international law on the books to assassinate this man and to kill an unknown number of civilians as they completely flattened 4 apartment buildings and targeted another 4 with bombings in southern Beirut. So, where does the region stand? Where do things go from here as Hezbollah is now fighting back against Israel in a number of ways, including targeting their attempt at a ground invasion? Well, we got into all of the latest with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Seyed Mohammad Marandi, a professor of English literature at the University of Tehran. Professor Marandi, thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you very much for having me.
I want to get your take on the latest here. I know that you've been in Beirut, where Israel has obviously continued a string of attacks. Even just today alone, they bombed the central part of the city, leaving nearly a dozen people dead as they're targeting heavily populated civilian and residential areas. Will you take me through what your time was like there, what the atmosphere was like there as people are dealing with terror attack after terror attack carried out by Israel?
Well, I went after the first day of airstrikes where they killed 500 people in the south and the east of the country. This was before Seyed Hassan Nasrallah was martyred. And I went to take a bit of aid, but also to help, with media and that sort of thing. It was a personal initiative, basically. But I was sitting in a cafe restaurant with a friend discussing politics, and then suddenly we heard these massive explosions, one right after another, much less than a second apart. And turned out there were, I think, 83 bombs, each weighing roughly a ton, that were used to assassinate Seyed Hassan Nasrallah. But we were roughly 1,000 meters away, if using a straight line, let's say. But it seemed like it was right next door, and that the building was going to come down upon us. It was like an earthquake, because it would just go on and on and on. And girls were screaming, women were screaming, men were walking around. We were all confused, what's happening? Where is this happening? I couldn't tell which side. Was it to the south, to the east, to the north, to the west? So I went outside and I saw the smoke, and the huge smoke rising. And since I lived near there for a year, I was on sabbatical in Beirut more than a decade ago. I know that neighborhood, because my home was actually pretty close to that area. It's a less expensive place in Beirut. And those 6 blocks of residential towers just completely disappeared, as if they never existed. Just rubble. And hundreds of people, I assume, died. And when the Israelis started to gloat, and Western media, they, instead of focusing on all the slaughter, they focused on the assassination, calling it a Hezbollah stronghold, where whereas it's a city just like Tehran or Moscow or New York or London or Paris. All of these are just residential buildings. The West likes to say Hezbollah is embedded in the local population. Well, the Mossad building is in a very, the CNN reporter just when the Iranians were striking, he was complaining that the Mossad building is in a very crowded neighborhood. Why don't they say that they're embedded? But actually, Hezbollah built these tunnels under the city so that the Israelis wouldn't bother bombing people's homes because the tunnels were protected. But in any case, people were terrified. They were prepared for war. They knew it was coming, but it still created terror. And then right after that, a couple of hours later, maybe less, I don't recall exactly, it's all a blur. But the Israelis announced that they're going to strike 3 other buildings in the south of Beirut. And when they strike buildings, that means the whole area is impacted. And they did it very quickly. People were not really notified adequately. I'm sure a lot of people didn't even hear the news. But instead of just bombing 3 places, they bombed, I think, 12 different places. And they've been doing that ever since. And now yesterday when I was in Beirut, before I left Lebanon this morning. I went to Syria, which was also under attack. An assassination took place, a bomb attack in Damascus and an airstrike in the north as well. An airstrike on Damascus, but also in the north. But this morning when I left Beirut, just a few hours earlier, they had bombed central Beirut. So they expanded outside of southern Beirut. And the terror goes on, and this is just Beirut. It's across the country, and so people have left. Most people have left southern Beirut. Some people have no place to go, so they just sit there. I visited southern Beirut yesterday with a lot of journalists. It was very chaotic, but we traveled around the different parts of southern Beirut, and there were people there. So they were protecting their shops. They are protecting their businesses, their homes. So then every time the Israelis bomb, they're going to kill people. But in addition to that, many of the refugees who've left their homes in the south of Lebanon, in Beirut and elsewhere, they go to other villages, they go to other towns and cities. And then the Israeli regime, they call people in these different cities and towns and communities and tell them that if you let these people stay, we're going to bomb. And they actually do bomb. And they have bombed communities that are not traditionally loyal or friendly to Hezbollah. So they want to also create division and hatred among the different groups, people, but also create greater despair among the refugees. So it's just amazing. And yesterday when we were touring southern Beirut, as I said, I know southern Beirut pretty well. They bombed schools. We went to five towers that were also crushed together that were just bombed yesterday morning. We arrived there a couple of hours later. It was all smoke and it was still burning underneath. And I was thinking maybe there's still kids under there or men and women who are screaming for help. I couldn't hear anything, but I kept thinking about it the whole time. So it was, the last few days have been really horrific. And, but the morale is very high, especially after the Iranian missile strikes and also the successes on the battlefield that Hezbollah has had in the last 48 hours. The people who I spoke to, their morale was high, even when Seyed Hassan was martyred. They were very upset, but they were, with regards to the Israelis, they were very steadfast. But after the missile strikes and the battles on the border, the mood became even more confident.
Yeah, and I appreciate you taking us through that because, I mean, to be there on the ground, to be an eyewitness to, as you're noting, all of this trauma, right? It's impacting all of the people in the area who, yes, for the last year, we have watched Israel as it has carried out an all-out genocide against the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And they've gone through this day in and day out. And yet somehow it's still shocking to watch Israel take this level of terror and turn it towards Lebanon, turn it towards a sovereign country that is supposed to be protected under international law, and target schools and hospitals and civilians. And it just goes to show that as long as they are allowed to continue on in this way, that's exactly what they're going to do. And, you mentioned Iran's retaliation. I know that there was it seemed like a lot of anticipation of, okay, what is Iran going to do? Are they going to get involved on their end? They did carry out this missile strike targeting military and security sites within Israel. And now you've got Israel saying that they are going to respond, that they're planning some sort of attack. And then you've got Iran saying, don't do this. We tried to warn you. It's going to escalate more and more each time we retaliate and respond. So how do you view the current tensions right now? Is there any pulling back on Israel from just carrying out attack after attack?
I think the Israelis want Americans to enter the war. The whole objective is to create a regional war. That's what Netanyahu wants. That's what his government wants. He doesn't care about the Americans or the Europeans or the oil markets or anything like that. He only cares about his own survival, and the people around him are the fanatics that we all know who they are. So I don't have to go into detail about that. But they are pushing it. The invasion of Lebanon is destroying Israel. The biggest losers are Israel. I think the Iranian missile strike was a serious defeat for the Israelis, and the Iranians warned that if they strike Iran again, they'll hit much harder. And the Iranians have now they've come onto the battlefield, and once you begin something, then the mood changes. Once the Iranians now are ready. Before, people were discussing what's going to happen. Now that the Iranians carried out the strike, they say, well, okay, you hit us, we hit you again, even harder. So the Israelis, and then Hezbollah, we've seen that they've succeeded on the battlefield. Their military capabilities are untouched. They've lost a few commanders, but that's Beirut. On the ground, on the battlefield, everything is very well protected. Beirut has always been a very different place because Beirut is a city of espionage. It's always been like that. Western embassies, Western NGOs, many Western mainstream journalists, and all these refugees. It's a city where it's almost impossible to keep secrets, and the Israelis have been working on gathering information for many, many years now. So that would be Hezbollah's weakest link, but otherwise Hezbollah is prepared. So a war with Lebanon would not be successful with Israel. A missile and exchanges with Iran would lead to defeat for the Israelis. They've already lost in Gaza. They've slaughtered people, which I think has destroyed Israel. Its image across the world has been destroyed. That's a defeat. Killing people, maybe it's a success for some people in Israel, maybe many people in Israel, but it's for those who are looking from the outside, it's a defeat for the Israeli regime. And the Red Sea has also not gone well. So the only thing that makes sense for Israel, for Netanyahu, is to escalate. And escalation will only make it worse for Israel unless they're able to get the Americans to enter the war. If that happens, then we could have a global economic meltdown because the Americans target Iran or Hezbollah. Iraqi resistance would sweep the Americans away from Iraq. People in Iraq are outraged about what happened to Seyed Hassan Nasrallah. The mood has changed. But if the Americans target Iran, not only would they be swept away from Iraq, but their assets in the Persian Gulf region would all be wiped out, but so would the regimes that host them. So all those oil and gas producers, they won't have any more oil and gas to sell. And that would be catastrophic for the world. So I think there's still sane people in Western capitals who recognize this. And I think that after the Iranian missile strike, the mood in the West has changed a bit, although you would know better. Because I've been traveling a lot and I've been moving around a lot, and I haven't actually been following up on the news itself as much as I normally would because of the situation. But we'll have to wait and see. The biggest question is, do the Americans want to do the foolish thing and fall into Netanyahu's trap? Because as I said, Netanyahu doesn't care about the Americans. He doesn't care about the United States. I mean, the very fact that he used electronic devices made by brands that are affiliated to the West and infiltrated supply chains, and the West did nothing about it. That means that he doesn't care about the West because Western brands are now going to be more suspect, especially since the West didn't respond and react. Who does this benefit? It benefits countries like China. And I mean, I know people around me and myself, that's what we're going to do. We're not going to be using Western goods anymore out of concern. So Israel doesn't care about Western companies. They don't care about Western brands. They don't care about Western citizens or anything like that. So the question is whether the Americans enter it or not. If they do, that would mean a catastrophe for the world. If they don't, Netanyahu will lose the war.
Yeah, I know. There's a lot at stake there, to say the least. And, speaking about the mood in the West, it's been interesting to watch. And I think it may be a little bit different if the US currently had a sitting president who gave the appearance of being in charge, because currently we're looking at Joe Biden going, we know he's not running the show. We have these two top contenders, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, who are extremely pro-Israel. And what I think is interesting is that you look at the Biden administration, the members of it, the Antony Blinken and Lloyd Austin, who seem to be calling the shots. And on the surface, right, they've been telling Israel, well, not necessarily telling Israel, telling everyone we want to see de-escalation. But then you had a report come out from Politico this week saying that in secret, they were telling Israel, now is the time to move on Lebanon, right? Now is the time to continue, and actually supporting them. What I also thought was notable is that this week we had Lebanon's foreign minister come out. He spoke out in a recent interview with CNN, and he revealed that Hezbollah Secretary General Seyed Hassan Nasrallah agreed to a U.S. and French proposed 21-day ceasefire with Israel right before Israel killed him. Now, I know that there's kind of been some back and forth on whether that was actually the case, but I mean, what do you make of Israel's decision to assassinate Nasrallah, a beloved longtime leader, not just for Hezbollah or for the people of Lebanon, but really for the region? And as you were noting, I mean, that's going to galvanize a whole number of people who may not have previously been too interested in the resistance. Now they're going to look at it and say, oh no, we have a clear enemy, and they are clearly targeting us, as Israel is with these ongoing bombings.
You're absolutely correct. Absolutely. They've made Hezbollah, in my opinion, stronger as a result of the assassination. Assassinating the senior commanders, I mean, it is a tragedy, but Hezbollah has many young commanders. And young commanders, perhaps in today's world with the new technologies, they may be more innovative anyway. But Seyed Hassan Nasrallah was a towering figure, widely respected, and they've made him into a martyr. And therefore, Hezbollah's influence, the name Hezbollah, the name Seyed Hassan Nasrallah, is going to have much greater influence. And we already see that in Iraq. We see people in Iraq who've been traditionally, as you were pointing out, quiet and indifferent or more silent and minding their own personal affairs, that they've come to the streets. And they're outraged and they show hostility not just towards Israel, but towards Israel supporters. Israel is sacrificing the West because this is all being done in the name of the West because, as you pointed out, the West is behind it. Even in the case of Lebanon, they were actually saying, go for it. So, in my opinion, while it is Seyed Hassan Nasrallah's loss it's huge, it's massive, it's very painful for people like myself But I think that in the bigger picture, it has only made him more important. It has made Hezbollah more popular, and it is only going to make things worse for the Israeli regime. But again, I don't think Netanyahu is calculating that way. Netanyahu, if he strikes Iran, I know that he knows. I'm pretty sure. I'm confident that he will be on the receiving end of a much bigger attack. But what Netanyahu is trying to do is expand the war so that others get involved. So he's destroying Israel. He's destroying the regime effectively. It's death by 1,000 cuts. But I think in his desperation, what he's trying to do is just see what he can do and try to turn this into a regional war. So if the world falls apart, that's fine with him.
Yeah, it's almost kind of fascinating to watch. I know that a lot of times we talk about the US empire, right? All of the moves it is making, the countries it has invaded around the world that are leading to the begin of its demise. And then you look at someone like Netanyahu, and it's almost like he is his own empire, and he just doesn't even know when to stop, has gotten so reckless, so genocidal, and the US is not so far holding him to account or pulling him back. Certainly a lot at stake here all around to continue to keep an eye on. And I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest here. Seyed Mohammad Marandi, a professor of English literature at the University of Tehran. Thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you very much for having me.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment. And as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. And if you want to support my work, you can also check out my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/rachelblevins. That's where you can sign up as a monthly paid subscriber and join the community there. You can also check out my new weekly series called Sanctioned, which is available for my paid monthly subscribers on both Substack and Patreon. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.